Well, today we are concluding this series called The Hyper-Connected Life. We live in what has been called the information age. It's been said that over 90% of all information that has been produced in the history of our world has been produced in the last 2 years. Well over 50% of all Americans carry these things around called a smartphone, which gives us access to that information 24/7. On average, we spend over 8 hours a day interacting with screens and devices. We have become the always-on generation. Always available, always on, always just a click away from any information that we need. And we don't realize how dependent we are on that information until it's taken away from us. Just 2 weeks ago, a group of us found ourselves in the middle of Africa on safari for several days, and we were totally unplugged. And in our particular safari vehicle, we got on this conversation about 80s pop stars. And then we really wanted to find some particular trivia out about who sang what song, and there was a bit of a disagreement in the car about who sang what song. And I reached for my phone to Google it, and there was no Google, and there was no phone. And it was very frustrating. We had to wait for days to resolve that conflict, which, of course, I came out on top of that one. I was right, so I felt good about it. But you don't realize how much you depend on information until it's taken from you. I mean, we just depend on it so much. And as we've been saying, this isn't bad. I mean, these are great devices, and it's a great time to be alive. I mean, with the technology that we have available to us, that it has the ability to enhance our lives. But technology is clearly a double-edged sword. And we've been talking about the other side of the sword. See, because while technology has the ability to enhance our lives, it also has the ability to steal our lives. Technology has the ability to give us the illusion of living, while it's merely stealing and distracting and robbing our time and taking us from what's most important. And so that's kind of the issue that we've been grappling with these last 3 weeks during this series. Is technology stealing or enhancing our lives? Now, there was a recent commercial produced by Apple that kind of led to an interesting conversation in the Kennedy household. I want to show you this commercial. You've probably seen it, and then we'll kind of talk about and unpack how it relates to our discussion.
We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race, and the human race is filled with passion. Medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for. To quote from Whitman, "O me, O life of the questions of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish. What good amid these, O me, O life? Answer, that you are here, that life exists, and identity. That the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse. That the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse. What will your verse be?"
Okay, so, what is this commercial selling? It's selling an experience. It's selling, really, life. If you want to really live, buy our screen, buy our device, right? Now, the first time my wife and I saw this commercial together, it moved both of us. But we had different experiences. So I remember her saying something along the lines of, "Wow, that makes me want to go buy an iPad," with tears in her eyes. She was so moved, and I reminded her she already had an iPad, right? But it moved her to think of beauty and the beautiful things that you could do with technology, like getting out and climbing a mountain and taking beautiful pictures and creating stunning videos. She's an idealist, and I love her for that. But I had a very different experience watching that commercial. While I was moved by it and I thought it was very well done, I kind of saw through it and I said, that's baloney. That's just a lie. They're telling me that I can't live outside without, technology, without their screen. Is this what technology really gives us? Really? Life? Who of us has bought an iPad and said, I want to go climb a mountain now, or I want to join a marching band, or I'm going to go scuba diving? Can I do those things? Yes. Can I use technology for those things? Sure. But in reality, am I doing those things with technology? Claire Diaz-Ortiz wrote a great little book on the subject called Greater Expectations. I'd highly recommend it. It's like less than 100 pages, but a great read about how to kind of deal with technology in our lives. And she kind of gives a different spin about the reality for most of us when it comes to technology. Listen to how she kind of describes things.
On a typical morning, I wake up to a blaring alarm, I hit snooze a few times, and I eventually roll over and turn on my iPhone. I immediately read a mountain of emails. I look through tweets and Facebook posts. I might even go on Pinterest, and this is all before I even get out of bed. An hour later, I'm in the office, and I'm doing the same thing, except this time on a larger screen. And my life is not that unusual. It's what so many of us are doing these days. We spend hours and hours and hours of our week simply online and not necessarily being productive or making meaningful connections or relationships with others around us. We are in a state of digital overwhelm, and we need to figure out how to get out of that. One of the problems we see about living our lives online is that we're essentially under constant attack. If we think of what our ancestors would do when they would wake up in the morning and go hunt something and drag it and bring it home, they were experiencing adrenaline rushes as a result of essentially their fight or flight response. The problem is today we feel that when we check our email. We check our email thinking that, there's that 1 in a million chance that something really amazing is inside. Maybe you won the lottery for real, or you got a job promotion. Something great could be there. And so we consistently try to check email or check Facebook or check Twitter in efforts to find that next high, essentially. We're seeking the digital high, and as a result, we're burnt out and stressed out.
So burnt out and stressed out. I think that's where most of us find ourselves as a result of technology, burnt out and stressed out. Most of us aren't living the iPad commercial. Most of us are more burnt out and stressed out because most of us are feeling that we're busy, but we're not really productive, that we're not getting a lot done, that this steady stream of data that we consume kind of gives us an illusion of productivity, of producing something, that we're spending our time doing something meaningful, but then we get to the end of the day and we look back at a busy, harried, stress-filled day and we say, what did I really get done of meaning? And many of us have this nagging feeling. The answer is not a lot. I sent a lot of emails, and maybe I had a couple productive meetings, and maybe I had a spurt of creativity when I got started in on that new project. But all in all, we don't see enough life and productivity to kind of justify 17 or 18 hours of just total on, all the time busyness. And because we don't feel like we're being as productive as we like, then we kind of feel guilty that we're not really living, and then we throw ourselves all the more into doing the things that we do, thinking that in being plugged in, we're going to find the answer. And so we never shut down. Again, Claire Diaz-Ortiz, who wrote the book Greater Expectations, she puts it like this. She says that, unfortunately, many of us spend our days not living the life we dream of. Instead, we just try to keep our head above the water, flailing in a sea of text message notifications, banner ads, Facebook likes, and the forwarded bogus emails from relatives who don't know how to use Snopes.com. We don't live into our goals or priorities, but rather react to the next demand and the next and the next. And this frantic pace of life that seems kind of to keep a more meaningful life just out of grasp isn't something that is new, and it's not something that's coincidental. As we're going to see this morning, it is a strategic plot to distract us from what matters most, from a very real enemy who wants to steal your life. The book of Exodus in the Bible takes us back about 3,500 years to about the year 1500 BC. And in it we find the story of the Hebrews who have been in slavery for 400 years. And for 400 years, their lives had become a daily grind of endless monotony. All they knew was hard work and labor. I mean, what they didn't know, though, was that God was about to do something amazing to set them free. That he was going to call them to an abundant life. He was going to give them a land of their own. And he was going to call them into relationship with himself, this life-giving God. And it all starts as God appears to Moses in the burning bush, and he kind of lets Moses in on the plan. And then he sends Moses and his brother Aaron to Pharaoh to kind of issue that decree, those famous words, let my people go. Exodus chapter 5, verse 1 puts it like this. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. This is Moses, or Aaron, talking to Pharaoh. Let my people go, so they may hold a festival to me in the desert. Pharaoh said, who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? So in other words, no, I won't let your people go. They're my slaves, and I'm going to keep them in bondage and in slavery. And if that's not enough for Pharaoh, he says, I'm going to go even a step further. Not only am I not going to release them, I don't even want them listening to this guy, Pharaoh, or Moses. I don't want them listening to this guy, Moses. I don't want them to know that they could have freedom and meaningful lives. So he takes things a step further, and he says in verse 6, that same day, Pharaoh gave this order to the slave drivers and foremen in charge of the people. You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw. But require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce the quota. They are lazy. That is why they are crying out, let us go and sacrifice to our God. Now, just a little side note here. If you were with us 2 weeks ago, we looked at the story of the Tower of Babel, and we saw how the brick was this new technology that people had discovered that they could do new things, and it could enhance their lives. And isn't it kind of funny how now, several generations later, it was that technology that had the Hebrews kind of enslaved. That technology that once promised to kind of enhance their lives and give them everything was now the thing that kind of defined their bondage. I mean, could God be kind of saying in the Bible that technology has a way of enslaving us? Probably not what he meant, but I thought it was kind of neat to think about, and I just mentioned it as a side note. You can kind of chew on it on your own time. But seriously, do you see what Pharaoh's tactic is in order to keep the people in slavery? I mean, do you see what his strategy is? It's pretty clear. Keep them busy. To keep them enslaved, give them constant activity, non-stop work. I mean, just look what he says in the very next verse, verse 9. He makes it very clear. Make the work harder for the men so that they keep working and pay no attention to the lies. Make their work harder. Keep them busy. Don't let them pay attention to the lies. Well, what lies is he talking about here? He's talking about the lies that Moses was telling the people, that God had a plan for them to set them free and to call them into relationship with himself and give them a meaningful life with him. And so these aren't lies. This was truth. This was truth. So what Pharaoh was really saying to his people was, make the work harder so that they can't pay attention to the truth and live. And this has been Satan's tactic ever since, to keep people in bondage. Just make their work harder. If I can't get you with distractions, I'll get you with busyness and distractions. Or if I can't get you with addiction and outright sin, I'll get you with distractions. Make the work harder. They have no time to pay attention to the truth and live. I mean, does this not describe our world today? I mean, just like the Hebrews, we are overworked and unbalanced. David Gray wrote a book called Practicing Balance, and he did a study, or he quotes a study that was done in our American work-home balance. And what it found is that Americans consider a 40-hour work week as part-time in most professional jobs and as a sign of a stagnant career. So if you're putting in 40 hours a week, you're either in a stagnant career or you're working part-time. Right? I mean, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, we were predicting that technology was going to reduce the work week to 15 to 20 hours. We were wondering what we were going to do with all the time because technology would advance and it would do all of our jobs. But the reverse is actually true. The more technology has advanced and our quality of life has advanced, the more we work. The typical American middle-income family put in 11 more hours a week in 2006 than in 1979. That's a lot of hours in a week. A 2012 survey found that if you have a smartphone and you're a professional, 60% of professionals who own smartphones put in a full 13.5 hours per day connected to their job, and then they juggle another 5 hours on the weekend connected to their job through their smartphone. That's 72 hours a week of job-related contact. That's if you own a smartphone. So the more technology you have, the more we work. Another survey of 1,000 workers was done, and that found that 68% of people check their email before 8 a.m., 50% check their email in bed, 38% say they routinely check their email at dinner, 44% say they check their email daily on vacation, and another 10% check their email hourly on vacation. One law firm put out a memo to their attorneys in kind of their workers' manual, and they kind of stated what is the reality, unspoken reality for many of us in our workplaces. They said this, they said, you should check your emails early and often. That not only means when you're in the office, it also means when you leave the office as well. Unless you have very good reason not to, for example, when you are asleep, in court, or in a tunnel, you should be checking your emails every hour. One of the last things you should do before you retire for the night is check your email. That is why we give you BlackBerries. So, does this make us bad people? No, it doesn't make us bad people. It's just the reality. We are plugged in. We are hyper-connected. We are always on. Make the work harder so they can't pay attention to the truth and live. Maybe this describes your life. Maybe not so much. Maybe you're like, hey, I've got good work-home balance. But I think we can all agree that God wants more for us than 13.5-hour days plugged in to email. That He wants more for us, and we want more for us. Really, all of us are created to desire freedom, to desire life. If you know the rest of the story of the Hebrews, you know that God ended up setting them free despite Pharaoh's best efforts. And more than just set the Hebrews free, God draws them to Himself. He wants to bless them. He wants to give them life. He wants to give them freedom. He wants to give them a new identity. And so no longer would they be slaves. They would be His people. And as we read through the story in Exodus, we see that God leads them to a mountain called Sinai. And there, he in order to kind of set boundaries around this new relationship and around their new life and around their new freedom, He gives them commandments. Specifically, He gives them the 10 Commandments. And for many of us, when we think of the 10 Commandments, we don't think of life. We don't think of freedom. We don't think of joy. For many of us, when we think of things like the 10 Commandments, the impression that we get is that these are life-sucking commandments. That God gave these commandments to the Hebrews to keep them from getting into trouble or from having too much fun or living too much. So He had to kind of say, hey, well, don't take things too far. But in reality, these commandments are life-giving. They set boundaries around and protect their relationship with a loving and life-giving God. That God would be their source of life. That God would be their source of joy. That God would be their source of meaning and fulfillment. And He says, if you want to protect that, our relationship, because I'm going to give all those things to you, I'm going to give you these commandments to protect your relationship with me as well as your relationship with one another. And it just recently occurred to me that these 10 commandments are so incredibly relevant in the area of technology. Have you ever thought about the 10 commandments of technology? What if we had the 10 commandments of how we handle or interact with information and technology? But there are some great forms of how to steward technology in the 21st century right there in the 10 Commandments. And while that may not have been what God had in mind when He gave them, He knew how universal they were and how relevant they were and how timeless they were. And we see that in the 21st century. And I think I could just go down the line and just look at every commandment and see how it protects our relationship with technology and how we break that, all of them so continually. But just consider a couple. Consider the 9th commandment that says, you shall not give false testimony. In other words, don't misrepresent the truth. Well, how does technology lead us to misrepresent the truth? Well, the ugly truth of social media is that most of us only share the very best parts of ourselves online and of our lives. We carefully craft this online image, right? That's not completely false, but neither is it completely true. We take 37 selfies, right? And then we take the one that has just the perfect lighting and makes us look the thinnest and the youngest and just makes us look the best. And then we post that one online. Right back row. Teenagers, can you relate to this at all? And then we carefully craft our status updates and our tweets to make ourselves seem just as wise as possible. And for the most part, the online self that we create is carefully crafted to make our life look just a little bit better than it really is. It's not completely false, but it's not completely true. And then that leads us to the 10th commandment. The 10th commandment says, you should not covet. And God told us 3,500 years ago that we're not going to live life to the full if we want our neighbor's life. We need to be content with our own life of really going to experience joy and freedom and meaning. But what happens is that social media leads many of us to covet. Again, studies have shown that when we look at our friends and our peers online, because we're looking at their best side, it has a downside. 27% of social media users say social media makes them feel worse about themselves because their friends appear to be more successful, wealthier, more content, smarter, more attractive, and more creative than we are. And what else can we expect when our friends are putting their very best picture of themselves online and we're comparing the reality of ourselves to their very best selves? And so when we break the 9th commandment and bear false witness, it leads others to break the 10th commandment and covet our lives. These life-giving commandments that God gave the Hebrews really do apply to our information age. But as we kind of conclude the series, I just want to kind of focus in on 2 commandments in particular that I think really kind of speak into our lives and can create more space to live because God gave us these commandments in wisdom 3,500 years ago. But consider with me the first commandment, where God said, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I set you free. You shall have no other gods before me. Again, God has just saved these people from generations, 400 years of slavery, meaningless existence, of monotonous toil. And He's calling them to live. He is calling them to life. He's calling them to freedom. And the first thing He tells them is if you want to really live, if you want to really experience life, you need to prioritize me. You need to put me first and keep me first in your lives. And if you're a follower of Christ, you know this intuitively. Because the times you have felt the most alive have been the times that you have been the most connected to this life-giving God. And it just makes sense. If God is the source of life, if He is the one that gives life and gives joy and gives meaning, if He is the creator of it all, then it would just make sense that if I want to experience more of life, then I need to put Him first and keep Him first and prioritize Him and then guard that relationship with everything that I have. And that's what God says to us. If you want to live, really live, keep me first because nothing else, no one else can give you life. And so while there are many ways we need to apply this to our lives, so many ways we need to apply this to our lives, to kind of overcome information overwhelm, I need to put the things that connect me to God, to this loving and life-giving God, I need to put those things first in my schedule and then guard those things with everything that I am. So this kind of speaks of the importance, I believe, of a morning routine. The problem so many of us have is that our morning routine is kind of what Claire was describing earlier. We roll over and we wake up to the glow of our cell phone, right? And we start scrolling and we plug in, and pretty soon we're several hours into our day and we realize all we've been doing is surfing and scrolling and searching online. right? And then once we're plugged in and once we're going, it doesn't stop until 17 or 18 hours later when our head hits the pillow again and we realize we haven't prioritized the things that bring life, the things that give us true freedom. So if we want to overcome digital overwhelm, if we want to live with purpose, we need to fit the most important things into our day at the very beginning and then guard those things with everything that I am. I need a morning routine that prioritizes my relationship with God. And I need to do that before I plug in or before I turn on that steady stream of data and information. So what does that look like for you? What does that morning routine look like for you? Or what could that morning routine look like for you? Or what would you need to do to establish a morning routine that says, God, you are first. I am prioritizing this relationship. I am guarding it with everything that I have because you are the source of life and the source of freedom. How can you set aside the first part of your day to do that? I would just encourage you to ask yourself, what are the things that make you feel alive? What are the things that you do that just make you feel totally connected to God? Figure that out and then front load your day with those things. It's that simple. Cut out a block of time every day where you're doing those things that make you feel connected to God. For me, some of the most important things I need to front load into the beginning of every day is I need to read. And for me, it's usually the Bible to kind of get some spiritual truth kind of in here because I got all this other information coming. I need to make sure I have a strong foundation in what's right, what's true, or maybe some spiritual book. For me, it's got to be some kind of a prayer time of kind of opening myself to God and just kind of being still, no devices anywhere, but just me and God and just me listening or me asking or interceding or saying, God, fill me, God, prepare me for this day. For me, it's got to be some time outside, being active. I've got to get outside. I've got to feel the sun on my skin. I've got to go for a walk and pray, or I've got to go for a run and listen to a sermon. Those are all a part of my morning routine. For you, I don't know, maybe playing a musical instrument and singing praise music to God. Maybe it's praying with your spouse. Maybe it's doing art. Maybe it's writing in a journal. But the key is to figure out what is it that connects you to God, and then front load those things into the very beginning of your day, and then guard that with everything that you are, to allow nothing else to come before Him. Prioritizing Him in our schedule. And then, once we've done that, then we very carefully step into this hyper-connected life, and we begin to relate to data and devices with the perspective that has come through this time that I've had developing my relationship with my life-giving God. So let me just encourage you, if you haven't already, establish a morning routine, not because you have to, but because you want to live. And God is the source of life. The second really relevant commandment for us today, I think, is the fourth commandment, the Sabbath commandment. God said in Exodus 28, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. What a relevant commandment for our world today. More than a relevant commandment, what an amazing gift for our world today. I mean, think about what this would have meant to those early Hebrews as they heard this coming from Moses or written on the tablets or coming from the mouth of God or whatever. They had been all their lives for generations slaves. All they knew was work, hard work, meaningless work, working for somebody else. All they knew was pleasing their taskmasters. This was their identity. I am a slave. I get my value from work. And then along comes this God, this powerful God who not only set them free through a series of incredible miracles, but now He's commanding them, take a day off. No, really, take a day off. He is telling them to take a break for a whole day. Rest. Stop. Your identity isn't in doing. You are no longer slaves. That is your past. Your new identity is in being. You are mine. You are my special possession. You are my children. Take a break and just be with me. Man, do we not need that? I mean, does that not sound like beautiful to us as a bunch of slaves who are kind of 13 and a half hours a day connected to devices? We need to take a break, and not just a break from work. Yeah, we need to do that, but we need to take a break from technology. We need a Sabbath from technology. We need a Sabbath from information and devices. And to many of us, that sounds life-giving. Wow, maybe you're already doing this, or maybe you're thinking, wow, why didn't I think of that before? But to many of us, that sounds terrifying. What? A whole day without my devices, a whole day without Facebook and Pinterest, a whole day without Google searches, a whole day without my smartphone? Are you kidding me? But the scarier it sounds, the more you probably need it, right? Because nothing reveals our true relationship with technology and devices as much as living a whole day without it. Just try it for one day and then just kind of listen to your heart. What is it you're missing? Why is it you keep grabbing for the phone? What void is that filling in your life? Why do you long for it so much? So what might it look like for you to kind of take a regular Sabbath from technology? What if we were to kind of unplug our devices one day out of 7? Again, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with using our devices on the Sabbath. I'm just saying we need to take a Sabbath from our devices, right? Whatever day that might be. So if we're going to develop a theology of technology, I think it necessitates a regular time off from being plugged in. Let me just challenge you to try this. Just try this for a week or two. Maybe it'll be the Sabbath from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. But what is the time when your kind of email count goes down the most, a 24-hour period, when stuff just kind of calms down enough that you can kind of unplug and get away with it for a significant period of time? And then just put your phone, your iPad, and your laptop away. Now, maybe you have to, check texts or return phone calls or do those kind of things, but at least disconnect from the internet. Try this for a week or two. Give yourself a break from screens. And then during your digital Sabbath, again, just listen to your heart. Allow the Holy Spirit to kind of search you out. Pay attention to those feelings that you have. How hard is it for you? And why is it hard? What are you missing? And then during your digital Sabbath, don't just stop. Don't just make this about not doing technology. Make this about doing the things that give you life. Get out and spend time doing things like worship and play and create and engage and interact and serve and love. As we consider what it means to really live as fully engaged and passionate followers of Jesus, none of us would intentionally sit down and plan out a life of being connected 72 hours a week, 8 hours a day on a device, being always on. None of us would actually plan that out. None of us would aspire to live reactive, stretched too thin, always on lives. Lives that are never really lived toward our goals and our priorities. But here's the thing. If we don't live intentionally, that is where our hyper-connected lives will take us. And some of us are already there. And so we need to take control of our technology before technology takes control of us. So just to kind of summarize where we've been the last 3 weeks, if we want to live well, we need to be willing to live intentionally, not reactively. And that means developing a theology of technology. And that theology needs to begin with an acknowledgement that the information age is here to stay. That devices are a part of our lives and technology is a part of our lives. And it's affecting the way we think and the way we work, and it's affecting the way we relate to each other, and it's affecting the way we relate to God. We just need to kind of come to terms with that. And then we need to kind of start setting boundaries around our usage of technology. That's what we talked about last week. And many of you had great ideas of things you were trying, of establishing technology-free rooms in your home and having times of the day when you get home from work that the smartphone goes away, or great software to battle technology that I was introduced to this week. I mean, the great ideas and boundaries we're setting around technology. But then it can't stop there with just boundaries, but we need to infuse our life with the things that matter most. And that means front-loading our day with a morning routine, things that keep us connected to a God who gives us life. And then taking a weekly digital Sabbath, a time when we're able to unplug from devices just to kind of reconnect with the world and the people and the God who so loves us. You want a life that matters. God wants you to have a life that matters. Care enough to take the time to put together a plan of what this will look like in your life, what your theology of technology will look like, so we could live well in this information age. And we just have a couple tools to help you in this. If you haven't never seen our personal growth plan card, as you leave here today on our Discover Newday table, you can pick one of these up. It helps you put together a plan for a morning routine and a weekly Sabbath. When you write it down, you're much more apt to do it. So I'd encourage you, write your plan down, take a card on your way out. Or if you've already done one, you want to modify it, build in a digital Sabbath or whatever, take a new card and fill that out here midway through the year and put your plan together. And second, we would love to pray for you. As you kind of work this through, if you want to talk to somebody, we'll have prayer counselors here afterwards today. If you want to come and pray with somebody or just kind of confess to somebody, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a digital Sabbath next week, or have somebody pray for you on any issues, relationships, finances, health. Come forward and pray afterwards. And join us on our Monday morning prayer conference calls. We'll be praying about these things as well.